Azuku Midoriya is different in this timeline. Azuku Midoriya realizes at a very young age when he goes into the doctors with his mother and he hears the words that himself is quirkless, he realizes that there is more that he can do. He realizes that there's so much that he can do personally to actually become stronger instead of just, well, not doing anything at all. From the age of 5 to basically him being even older, Azuku would start in martial arts. Starts in martial arts that would vary. He would even get into basically wrestling. Anything you can really think of that would help you in defending or fighting off attackers, maybe even sustaining villains, he began to learn. Wrestling was a beautiful art for him, especially allowing him to control certain limbs and allow him to basically subdue somebody without getting extremely hurt. And he would, on top of that, would combine that with his judo and also his jiu-jitsu skills. Soon he would get into more stuff like karate, hand-to-hand combat type of deal, and he would grow more and more. It was insane. His mother would think that he must have a quirk. He must have some fast learning quirk. He must have some prodigies, something. He doesn't. It's confirmed later on that he definitely does not have a quirk. Azuku is some sort of quirkless prodigy. Frankly, his mother is excited to see that someone quirkless like Azuku can do this, can be strong. Azuku would continue on with his training, continue on with learning martial arts and exercising and stuff like that, all the way until he's about 12. Remember, he can't do anything too crazy. I mean, he's not going to be doing some weight training or anything like that. That doesn't make sense for a kid his age. But learning techniques and stuff like that is definitely warranted. After a while of just flat out getting more or less bullied in his school, people started realizing to not mess around with Azuku Midoriya. People would try to throw punches at him, kicks, anything to basically make fun of him. They throw their bags at him and even try to just bully him verbally. Azuku would either ignore them or they get flipped on their back immediately when they tried to even hurt him. Azuku was out of the league of all these people. Even Bakugo would see this and get kind of frustrated, wondering how he would be able to do such a thing. And when they're about 12 years old, Bakugo would approach him, asking in his own little furious tone about how he got so strong. Azuku would just explain that he's been doing martial arts all his life now, after they told him that he was, well, quirkless, and he felt useless and everybody called him that. He decided to do something about it. Bakugo, hearing this, is in a way frustrated, but at the same time respects Azuku for that. From here on out, Bakugo isn't going to be bullying Azuku. He's going to see him as someone that he needs to make sure he's stronger than. He can't let some quirkless, quote-unquote, prodigy keep up with him when he's doesn't have the blessing of a quirk itself. So this even gets Bakugo to start training his quirk a little bit earlier. Of course, Bakugo will be limited in that training. I mean, he can't really do much. And of course, you would get in trouble if you get caught using your quirk. But Azuku would have no limits for that. Azuku can continue training his body, continue training his martial arts, anything he can possibly do. He began at the age of 13 to 14 getting into different tournaments, events. If that was a kickboxing event, something simple with heavy padding, he's not going to get in the ring with any MMA fighters, even though he probably could and beat a couple amateurs, but he's not going to do stuff like that. He wants to do everything at the, the more amateur-ish and kid-ish level, because he feels that there's no reason to risk anything too crazy. And he's done some spars with some older people, some basically world champion like, or future world champion like caliber fighters. And of course, they're still ironing out their difficulties, but Azuku can somewhat hang in there. I'm not going to act like he's going to go beat a world champion by any means, but when you have someone like a prodigy like Azuku, he can definitely keep toe. He enters wrestling events still. He enters jiu-jitsu events, judo, anything you can really think of he's done and will do in the future. Azuku continues on this path and is basically a force to be reckoned with. And someone we all know very well would actually be scouting him and would be extremely interested in Azuku. Aizawa, the one we know as their future sensei of Class 1A, would actually hear of this young boy. Through the grapevine of everything, people would talk about this quirkless boy that would be storming through the events. Yes, there are quirks in this judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, all of this. There are quirks that are involved. So some people are larger than others because of their quirk, or maybe someone has larger hands or a different foot size or something like that. All of these are advantages to a certain extent. But he hears about this young boy who's quirkless, and they call him the Prodigy. He seems to be just completely destroying everybody. Everybody at his age group would get annihilated, and most people in the adult age group would get beat as well. Some people that have been doing it for 25, 30 years even call him this accelerated prodigy, that what he's gotten out of 2 years, they've gotten out of 10 years. That's how good Azuku is. Aizawa would eventually go to one of Azuku's wrestling matches, seeing Azuku just dominate the competition with his flawless technique. This kid, he's not only a prodigy, but he's textbook. He knows every ins and in and out, but not only that, he puts his own twists on everything. He puts his own little stamp. It's as if he knows that doing everything by the book isn't the best way of going about it. If it says to kick a certain way, you should add your own thing to that. Make that kick even better. Aizawa would eventually walk up to the young boy, walk up to Azuku Midoriya, and Azuku knows who exactly Aizawa is. He's a big fan of Eraserhead and even goes to shake his hand. Aizawa shakes his hand and Aizawa questions, "Kid, are you, actually quirkless?" "Oh, yes, I am. Why do you ask?" Aizawa is kind of shocked. He's kind of surprised that this kid is actually quirkless. He was kind of under the impression that maybe, just maybe, it was some sort of joke. Maybe his quirk was kind of limited. Maybe it was a quirk that would never be seen. But if he's actually quirkless, that's pretty impressive. He even questions why they call him the Prodigy, and he kind of just shakes his head and says that he really shouldn't have that nickname. He's not that good. There's some people in here that are better. But Aizawa points out that these people have had 35 years on him. There's a big difference, and they're grown men, grown females, grown people. Like, it's ridiculous. Aizawa pointing this out, Azuku kind of scratches the back of his head and asks him as calm as possible and in not a conflict way about why he's even there. And Aizawa says that he's doing, I guess, a little bit of scouting. And Aizawa explains that he is the first year teacher for UA High School, in which Azuku, hearing this, is extremely excited. There's no way, really? I want to go to UA. And of course Aizawa smiles at this and nods, saying that he definitely has the tools to do so. Even though he's quirkless, he might be able to get by with it. There's some tests that might be a little bit more difficult, but if he's smart, he passes the written exam, and he approaches the practical exam properly, there's a good chance he can get into Class 1A. And if it's not, he'll probably get into Class 1B. Frankly, there's some people that don't really, have amazing quirks anyways, so they'll get in. But nonetheless, Azuku definitely has a chance. Azuku thanks Aizawa for the bout of confidence, thanking him for a little bit of advice that he would eventually give him, and they would basically say their farewells. But Aizawa has a hidden agenda. Aizawa knows about something that Azuku and the basically entirety of the world doesn't. That's All Might. All Might and his powers. Aizawa would immediately go to All Might and tell him that he found somebody. He found somebody that he may want to consider. And of course, All Might would question who this boy is and who this person is. But Aizawa would say give him a couple years. He's still young, but once he's ready to try out to go for the entrance exam, he needs to meet him. This boy might be something else. He seems to be quirkless, but he truly is what they say he is. Aizawa goes to walk away, and All Might questions, "What do they say he is?" "A prodigy." Immediately, All Might is shocked to hear this. A quirkless prodigy? How is that possible? He doesn't know. He wants to know for himself. He wants to figure this out, but he won't really know. Azuku would continue on and continue his training, and eventually he'd actually decide to head to UA itself to check out what they call the UA Sports Festival. During this time, we have various other students basically showing off their talents. He sees a young boy by the name of Mirio Togata, and it seems that he has some permeation like quirk. He's able to go through things, but he seems to be, well, struggling with it. Azuku watches on as various other students go about their entire class. We have Mirio, we have Tamaki, we have Nejire, we have various other people that will eventually be in their third year when Azuku is there. During a bit of a break though, Azuku would actually go down and begin to walk around and trying to meet these students, eventually coming across that boy, Mirio, the one that lost all his clothing. He walks up to Mirio and taps him on the shoulder and asks if he can get a proper handshake. He does just that, and Azuku looks him up and down. "Your quirk, it's interesting, extremely interesting." And Azuku begins to actually relay some ideas with Mirio. "See, your quirk, I assume it's all about concentration, correct?" And Mirio immediately says yes, that it's like a sequence of events. Azuku then flat out basically says all the things that Mirio was going to say before he said it. He even gives him some tips, maybe some ideas that he could try and use to utilize his quirk. That yes, the whole clothes thing may be an issue, but if everything is based around focus, he might be able to make those clothes stick in a way. But maybe not necessarily stick, but also go permeate with him. Azuku begins to explain this and tries to get some logic behind it. Of course, this is extremely difficult. I mean, Azuku doesn't have the quirk. I mean, he may be smart, but he's not some super genius. But Mirio takes that to heart, takes some good advice, and even asks the boy his name. He says that his name is Azuku Midoriya, and Mirio is shocked to hear this and points at him. "You're the one Aizawa was talking about." Aizawa? Oh, yeah, Eraserhead. Yeah, he was, wow, that's definitely something. Azuku is kind of in awe at the fact that a hero was talking about him. But, you know, I mean, he must be pretty confident about scouting Azuku if that's the case. Another person would come running over, and it's actually Nejire Hado, telling Mirio that the next event is about to begin. She introduces herself to Azuku, and Azuku does the same in his normal awkward fashion, of course not really knowing who these people are, and he even compliments her quirk, saying that it's extremely impressive and gives her some insights. She compliments how intelligent he really is and looks forward to hopefully seeing him at UA, especially because that must be the reason why he's kind of out and about watching what's going on. Azuku nods and says that he'll definitely be here, and that's a promise. Azuku waves them all goodbye and says he has to leave early, but wishes them all good luck on any events coming up soon, in which Azuku leaves, and the two of them are in complete awe that he's extremely smart, but he also basically takes extreme amounts of, well, you could say, enjoyment in learning new things, enjoyment in perfecting new things. That's just who Azuku is, and that's just how he's been all his life. Azuku would eventually head home, deal with some things. Obviously, he still has school, but school's never been a problem for Azuku by any means. He gets through school relatively easily, and a couple more years would pass, and it'd be finally time for that last day of middle school. He would be speaking or watching the teacher speak, and the teacher would say that, you know, he would tell them that they would maybe take a job request test or something, But, of course, he knows that they all want to go the hero route. He throws all the papers in the sky, and everyone begins to cheer and use their quirks, except for Bakugo and Azuku. I mean, of course, Azuku doesn't really have a quirk, so he wouldn't be able to use one anyways, but you know what I'm saying. Nonetheless, the teacher kind of explains that they actually have two people trying out for UA, and that's Katsuki Bakugo, who he believes will definitely get in, and Azuku Midoriya. But the teacher is a little skeptical about Azuku. And everybody else is as well. Either they're haters, or they're just kind of, well, not liking the fact that he's quirkless. And frankly, it's kind of whatever for Azuku. He's been working all his life for this, and if he can't make it and he can't get into UA, that's fine. He'll go to a different hero school and beat out whoever's there and get better and better, and then eventually he'll become a pro hero. He's gonna prove it to himself. He's gonna prove that he can do it. And obviously, at the state he is right now, it's gonna be a struggle. Yes, he may know martial arts. Yes, he may be advanced in almost everything he's known so far. But when we're talking about getting into UA, we know what's up and coming, especially with the practical. The practical is going to be a little bit more difficult. But Azuku's been thinking about that. There might be more to the practical than, well, face value. Azuku would shut that idea off while he's listening to the teacher, but eventually they would all be done and allowed to leave. Bakugo would approach Azuku, telling him that he shouldn't really budge on trying to go to UA, he should just go to a second grade school to just make sure he can limit the humiliation. Azuku pats him on the shoulder. It's all good, I understand you don't want competition, but unfortunately you will be getting it, because I promise, if I go, you are not getting first in that exam. Azuku smiles toward Bakugo, knowing how to get under his skin, and just walks away. Azuku ready to just head off to his classes once again to basically get ready. He wants to continue his training, and he's going to ramp up his training tenfold to make sure that he's ready for this exam. While he's walking home, he's studying his journal. As he heads under a bridge, he looks through quirk after quirk, learning more and more, and even sees what he wrote down about some of the third year or the future third year students, which he wrote about 2-3 years ago or something like that. He looks through it, seeing Nejire Hado and the explanation of her quirk, and even seeing Mirio and the explanation of his quirk. He wonders how strong they are now. He hasn't really been keeping up very much, but assuming how or the potential that their quirks have, he's sure that they're definitely at the top of the entire school. Azuku begins to close his notebook, and he begins to hear rumbling beneath him. Immediately he runs toward the exit, sliding and almost reaching the exit as he turns around. He sees a giant villain blast out of the sewer. It's the sludge villain.
Kid, I need your body. I didn't know he was here.
Azuku is confused. What the hell is this guy even talking about? The sludge villain charges at Azuku at insane speeds, and Azuku immediately runs out of basically the little underneath of the bridge. He tries to evade the sludge villain as much as possible, but his foot gets grabbed. Immediately, Azuku slides out of his shoe, stumbling his way away as fast as possible, trying to get away. He begins climbing up the wall, bouncing off each wall to the side, and trying to climb and just evade the sludge villain as much as possible. He boosts over the sludge villain and even throws his bag straight at one of his eyes. He kind of slips into the sludge villain's goo though and falls on the ground, and he slightly hits his head on the ground, putting him in some sort of daze. But just as the sludge villain is about to capitalize off of it, it seems like Azuku is going to be okay, because he stalled just enough time for the one and only symbol of peace, All Might, to arrive. Azuku looks to his right to see All Might blast out of the manhole cover and use a signature Detroit smash. All Might smashes the sludge villain into the wall as he splatters everywhere, Azuku rubbing the back of his head as he looks up toward All Might and slings himself up. He looks at him and runs over. All Might, I'm your biggest fan. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for also saving me. Azuku kind of laughs at this, and All Might asks if he can help him out clean this thing up. And of course, Azuku would, asking for an autograph eventually, and All Might would sign in his own All Might way, which is kind of not a signature. It's kind of just putting All Might in big letters. But nonetheless, it's still a signature. And he would then ask All Might a couple questions, and eventually would bring up this one question Azuku's been wanting to ask. And All Might questions what it is, and he asks if someone who's quirkless can, be a hero. All Might then begins to remember. All his memories begin to rush in. He knows who this is. This is Azuku Midoriya, the one that Aizawa scouted years ago. This is... oh my god. He realizes it and says that being quirkless will make things extremely difficult. And it's going to be a sacrifice. And you may die in the line of fire, but any hero could die in the line of fire. As long as you feel comfortable with trying to save people, even though you are at this substantial limitation, you should go and do that. But it's all up to you. All Might points at him and nods as he's about to jump off, and he waits for his response. Azuku stands his ground and says that even if he can save one person, it will be worth it. Azuku smiles as All Might jumps off, and All Might realizes then and there, well, it seems like this kid truly is, well, worth one for all, and is definitely deserving of it. Azuku would begin to head home, but just as he does, it seems like something's happening in the far distance. It seems like that bottle that All Might had, unfortunately fell out, and someone is trapped within the sludge villain. Azuku begins running over to see someone he knows, someone that is his rival, someone that's, at the end of the day, is his friend. Katsuki Bakugo is stuck within the sludge villain. Azuku immediately grabs some things out of his bag and goes sprinting past the caution tape, past the other pro heroes that are doing jack squats. They're doing nothing. But who is watching as all this unfolds? All Might himself. He saw this occurring and realized he can't do anything about it, but he'll definitely get some motivation to do something when he sees the future of Hero Society charging into the line of fire without hesitation. Azuku dashing in, throwing pencil after pencil toward the eyes of the sludge villain, trying to allow Katsuki Bakugo to break free. He does anything in his power. Maybe he can light it on fire. Maybe he can do something. He immediately grabs some fire hose, or at least breaks off a part of this hydrant and tries to spray it with water. That maybe if that doesn't work, maybe he'll try something else. He tries anything you can think of. He's literally trying anything his brain could even come up with, but eventually he would get partially caught. But just as he gets caught, someone flies over the area. And who is it? It's All Might. All Might winds back his punch and sends it flying into the sludge villain, blasting it apart once again as if it was deja vu. Immediately, Azuku sees what occurred and is happy. But, of course, he gets lectured by the other pro heroes, but he just walks away. He just leaves, thinking that's, what are they gonna do? It's not like he used his quirk to do anything. Definitely wasn't illegal. He might have put himself in danger, but hey, that's not illegal. Azuku would just head home after helping Bakugo, and Bakugo would eventually show up, saying that he owes him nothing. That he doesn't care, that it doesn't matter if he tried to save him or saved him or whatever, it doesn't matter. He owes him nothing, and he'll make sure to beat him nonetheless in the entrance exam. Bakugo scoffs and begins to leave, and Azuku kind of just smiles, knowing that Bakugo is appreciative in his own, Bakugo way. He continues to walk, and out of nowhere, someone just jumps in front of him. And guess who? It's All Might. All Might reaches his hand out and then out of nowhere shrinks. Azuku begins to kind of panic, but then quickly is explained what's going on. And the reason why All Might, wants to speak with him, it's because he wants him to have the power of, one for all. Azuku is shocked to hear this. He's been quirkless all his life. He's been pushing himself to basically be the best even though he doesn't have a quirk. He's been pushing himself to be the strongest, even without a quirk. And now All Might is telling him that he can have a quirk, that he can have the power of someone he's been idolizing. He can have such power that can open up pathways that he wouldn't even believe. All Might smiles toward Azuku and asks if he's ready to take that leap. It's going to be a leap of faith, but he wants to know if he's ready. Azuku reaches out for his hand and shakes it, saying that he wants the quirk and he'll make sure to make him proud. All Might smiles and says that, well, they'll have to do a little bit of training. Of course, he's in pretty good shape right now, but his martial arts is really good, but his body is not, at least not tip-top. So All Might wants to make sure that's the case. And to do that, he says to meet him at Dagobah Beach at 5 p.m. Azuku would tell his mother about what occurred, not specifically, of course, but it said that he's going to start training and blah blah blah, and that's what he's going to do. Eventually leading him to heading to Dagobah Beach, and when he arrives there, All Might explains exactly the training regimen, cleaning up the entirety of the beach. Azuku would struggle a bit, and of course anybody would, but he would actually get it done about half as soon, or about 5 months. Azuku would be shredded to the bone, and on top of that, well, he is an extremely good martial artist. After about 5 months, All Might says that, well, this is perfect. Now he'll be able to take on the quirk and hopefully learn how to use it within this time period. Azuku is then given a strand of his hair, and Azuku looks at it in complete disgust. Ugh, I forgot you said this. This is disgusting. Azuku eats the hair, and eventually the quirk would activate about, well, an hour or two later. When it activates, Azuku begins to try and use it. He activates One for All in his entire body and can feel the power that's insane. But he realizes something. He feels that he can't even move. If he moves, he might destroy part of his body, in which All Might shakes his head.
You are right, that might occur.
Azuku just shakes his head and begins to think, what if I treat this like sparring? In which All Might is confused. What is that even supposed to mean? I mean, All Might hasn't really, he's done training and stuff, but sparring, come on, he obviously do some more explanation. He doesn't understand what he's talking about. Azuku explains that in sparring, you don't go 100%. You never do. If you go 100%, you're kind of an asshole. You never go 100% in sparring. You're trying to get a feel for each other, maybe get some work in. That's the whole goal, especially if you're sparring toward the end of a camp for basically fighting somebody or, anything, wrestling matches, stuff like that. You don't go full speed at the end of a camp. Azuku thinks of it the same way. Maybe he can go 5%. Maybe he can go 3%, something, maybe. What if that's what he can do? He looks at All Might and asks if they could do a little bit of sparring. All Might says, yeah, of course, but he'll have to hold back. Azuku smiles and says, exactly. Azuku lines himself up, ready to fight All Might, and as the sparring begins, Azuku lands punches without breaking his bones. Nothing breaks. It seems like Azuku has picked up on something. He can use something known, well, he doesn't even know, but it's something known as full cowling. He's using it currently at 5%, but he can feel that he can definitely ramp it up more and more. He ramps it up to about 15%, and he feels like this is a good place to stop, at least for now, until he gets some more training with the quirk. He realizes that there's just so much space to improve with, but at the same time, everything will slow down. He understands quote-unquote how the quirk works, but he needs to know more and more. After about another 5 months of training, Azuku has One for All down to about 30 to 35%. You could even argue that it might be even more, but let's just say 35%, and Azuku can feel that there is even more power within One for All that they don't even know. Azuku brings this up to All Might, asking if he has any other special abilities that, well, he doesn't know about, and All Might says no. What is he talking about? He's kind of confused. But Azuku does come to the conclusion eventually that there might be a chance that the other quirks of One for All, the other One for All users, might be within him. Azuku brings it up to All Might, and All Might is shocked. How is that? Is that even true? Could that be? I mean, obviously Azuku doesn't know for sure. It's just a theory. I mean, he doesn't know, but nonetheless, it's definitely something to think about. But with that said, the 10 months are over, his studying is complete, and he's ready for the UA entrance exam. He eventually would go, and when he would arrive, he'd bump into somebody, almost falling, but luckily catching himself with a simple backspring. He looks, and it's someone familiar. Helping her up, he questions why she's here. It's Nejire Hado. And she explains that she's actually here to watch the entrance exam, in which Azuku smiles and says, well, hopefully they can put on a bit of a show. Then out of nowhere, Nejire realizes, this is Azuku Midoriya. She met him, or she basically says, like, it's nice to meet him again. She realizes that, well, obviously they've met before, and it was a couple years ago, but still, it's been a while. And Azuku is happy that she recognized him and says that it's definitely a pleasure, and it seems like she's gotten a lot stronger. And Nejire nods and says that she could say the same thing for him, and she wishes him good luck and says that all of the teachers and everybody are definitely going to be watching him because they've heard a lot. Azuku smiles and says that he hopes he doesn't disappoint as he walks away and gets ready for the first part of the exam, which is the written. President Mike would eventually talk and eventually allow them to do the written, in which Azuku feels pretty confident that he passed with flying colors. Now for the real test, the practical. What's the practical going to be? And he learns that it's a bunch of robots, and he begins to write down stuff in a small journal that he has, and he puts it away. And eventually President Mike gets a whole thing with Tenya Ida, but that all doesn't really matter very much. Eventually leading to the practical exam. Azuku would wait outside and get ready to just straight up go. As right when the gates swing open, Azuku goes sprinting out at 35% of One For All. Just touching one of the robots, he obliterates one. He smiles and begins sprinting around at insane speeds. Everybody else is shocked. Not only completely shocked, people are questioning basically why he went without go. And President Mike says there are no countdowns in a real battle. Azuku would just begin to obliterate one after another. Every single robot itself would get just destroyed. Eventually, he feels that he had enough points. He feels good. He feels like he'll definitely beat Bakugo. And just as he's sitting there waiting, he thinks about the 0-pointer. Isn't there supposed to be like some big robot that's like no points? Where the heck is that thing? Just as he says this, the 0-pointer comes to play. Azuku decides that it might be best for him to just take off, sliding down this building or part of a building that he's on, more like a little balcony or ledgeway. And he begins to leave, but just as he does, he hears the scream of a girl that is stuck under rubble. He realizes that this is something All Might would want him to do. Make a stamp. Save people no matter what. All Might himself is currently watching and wonders what Azuku will do. And that's exactly what Azuku's going to do, what All Might would do. Azuku goes charging in to help the girl. He punches the robots, but only forces it to stagger back slightly. Azuku realizes there's only a couple options. He jumps up at 100% and shatters the robot into pieces and makes it collapse, or the girl gets crushed. He tries to brainstorm anything else, and he gets frustrated with himself. He tries to punch the robot back more and more. He begins to punch it, a flurry of punches, punching it back more and more, but it's obviously gaining more and more ground toward the girl. As the foot is about to step on her, Azuku contemplates just smashing it entirely to the side, and as he's about to do this, he winds back his hand. But just as he winds back his hand, this odd black rope appears within it. He's shocked, but he realizes something. He brought this up to All Might. There are other quirks within One For All. It might be a theory, but if it's true, Azuku might be able to maintain and actually use them. Azuku throws his hand out as all of these black whips go spiraling out of it. A ton of them. They wrap around the robot's legs, body, arms, head. Azuku grabs it and with 35% of One For All, pulls back. Not only does the robot fall back itself, but the front side of it gets crushed entirely with this black whip. Smashing into the ground, Azuku retracts it back into his arm and looks at his hands. Where the hell did that thing come out of me? It's like some webbing. Am I a spider now? Black spider? How does that even work? Is it rope? What is it? Azuku is all confused, but he realizes that the girl is still on the ground. So he runs over, helping her out, and basically immediately getting her to Recovery Girl to get healed up and all that. In which everybody is still shocked at what Azuku just did. What kind of power does this kid have? All of the teachers, on the other hand, are smiling. This kid, he truly is something else. All Might looks at Aizawa and nods, and even gives him a little bit of a handshake, thanking him, saying that this boy right here has the potential to truly be the next #1 hero. Azuku Midoriya has finished the UA entrance exam. He feels extremely confident about what he's just done, and he begins to just head out. Immediately, he's stormed by multiple people that were either watching. One including Aizawa, who's walking behind the pack, but Nejire, Mirio, and a couple other students that are in the 3rd year are also going to ask him questions. They question him like crazy, asking about the whole quirk. He was quirkless, he was this. And Azuku kind of waves his hand, saying that he was quirkless. It seems like all the hard work he did actually reactivated a quirk that was dormant within him. He's not sure how it works. He's still even learning how his quirk works. So that whole little display of that weird black rope, that was something he had no idea even existed within his quirk. From a little bit away, All Might is watching, and luckily he doesn't feel too fearful about Azuku basically saying the truth, because Azuku is pretty fast on the fly. He's extremely smart, so it wouldn't take him too much to just come up with a random idea that is totally untrue, but would get him away with it. Nejire, Mirio are extremely impressed, and obviously they know how strong Azuku could have been with a quirk, so what happens now that he has one? He seems extremely powerful nonetheless, so it's really just flat out impressive. Of course, Bakugo comes storming by, saying that there's no way Azuku beat him, but the others from class basically the 3rd years, or the big 3, begin to say that they wouldn't be so sure about that if they were him. Azuku kind of shrugs it off and says that he'll be seeing them, well, pretty soon, because he's sure that he got in. Nejire agrees, and so does Mirio, saying that they'll probably be working together quicker than he possibly could imagine. Of course, Azuku would head off, and All Might would actually meet him. All Might questioning some things that actually occurred, especially with the use of whatever that quirk was. Azuku has no idea what happened, but All Might says he'll do some research into the past users of One For All. Maybe there's a reason why that quirk awakened. Maybe there's a reason or somehow that Azuku forced the activation. Azuku has no idea. He doesn't know, but luckily he was able to make that activation because he was able to save that girl. Nonetheless, after basically having that nice day and having a good time basically celebrating with his mother, especially with how successful he was in the entrance exam, he goes to sleep that night. During that sleep though, he would wake up in a cloud of mist, something covering his face and his mouth, so he couldn't even speak. Someone, other known as a former user of One For All, actually introduces himself, saying that he was the one that granted him this power. It seems that Azuku is far ready to actually gain some of his powers, and that these quirks will slowly but surely start tumbling into his possession. This quirk he's using or used is known as Black Whip, in which Azuku is just listening in complete awe at the idea that he has this power. There's so much he can do with it. Like, what can't he do? He basically can sling around like some spider person? Spider-Man? Spider-Boy. Sure. Azuku is just interested, listening as much as possible, but eventually that user of One For All would deteriorate and disappear as if it was just a dream. In a way it was, but at the same time it was a vestige of One For All speaking with Azuku. He would wake up the next morning and the windows around him would be shattered, or at least cracked, almost completely broken, and Azuku would look around. He'd go outside and tell his mother that something occurred last night in which she thinks that he's talking about something else, and he says no, it's literally the window shattered because of some reaction to, I don't know, his quirk that got basically shown up out of nowhere. And she's confused, but then sees these shattered windows and says that it's fine for him not to worry about it, just to continue his training, continue working hard, and she's sure that everything will fall into place for him. And maybe one day he'll pay her back for the windows. Azuku laughs at this for a little bit, and of course he would continue on working hard and getting his training up. He would still go to his classes and basically learn how to learn new techniques for jiu-jitsu and karate and everything you could possibly think of, but less and less people would want to go against him, especially because without a quirk he was kind of destroying everybody. Now with a quirk, I mean, that's kind of scary. If he activates it on accident, he might hurt someone pretty bad. Azuku knows how to not use it, so it's really nothing to worry about, but of course everybody's kind of chicken to even step into the ring with him, you could say. Nonetheless, a couple weeks would pass, and finally the letter from UA would eventually arrive. When Azuku opens the letter, he sees a very, very familiar face. It is All Might himself, telling Azuku that he definitely did a great job, and that he's going to be number one out of everybody in the entrance exam, and that he's welcome and he's going to join Class 1A. Azuku is extremely excited to hear this, and extremely excited to hear that school is only going to start up very, very soon. Azuku being excited, he just runs out and shows his mother, and basically this is the next step for him to become that number one hero that he wished to be since he was a little kid. After some time would pass, they'd finally arrive for the first day at UA. UA would be pretty simple. Azuku would enter Class 1A and immediately see Bakugo arguing with Tenya Ida, and this was just something Bakugo just did from time to time. Azuku would just walk by, and Bakugo would get mad as he walks over and basically tells him that don't think that getting number one now is gonna basically carry him all the way through. Azuku laughs and says, "Who says he got number one? I swore you got number one, Kachan. I mean, I'm pretty sure I got number 3. I mean, that's what my letter said." Of course, Azuku is lying in this regard. He's just laughing about it. And Bakugo, hearing this, gets really mad, thinking that somebody else got number one. But at least he got higher than Azuku, basically making fun of him, saying that he knew that he would have gotten number two. Just as these little bickerings happen, a bunch of other people begin to flood in. Azuku just ignores Bakugo as he continues to tirade, but he just sits down and waits. Eventually, more and more people would stumble in, including the person that Azuku saved, which her name is Ochaku Uraka, basically saying that she really didn't have much time to thank him anymore, and thanks him a ton. Azuku says it's fine, and says that anybody that would have the power to help someone like that would have used it. Unfortunately, many others just, didn't have that strength to do so. But he basically doesn't mean to sound like a jerk, but at the same time, it is true to a certain extent. We've seen it in real life, and we've also seen it in the exam. There's times that heroes don't have the strength to do it, so they just don't. Of course, this would be a little bit different in the entrance exam. The entrance exam, I'm sure they just didn't care, and they were just leaving, and they just wanted to make sure that their scores weren't hurt by trying to help somebody out. Of course, this would all the whole conversation would end relatively quick when Aizawa would walk in, telling everybody to sit down and shut up. Aizawa would introduce himself as obviously Aizawa or Sensei or whatever you want to call him, and he begins to explain some things.
Listen, all of you are heroes in training. But I think you all need to be tested. I don't care about no entrance exam. I don't care that they so quote-unquote tested you. I'm going to be testing you. And if you're thinking about that whole, what about the orientation? No orientation. You guys have already heard all your life how great you are. I'm not here to tell you how great you are. Go meet me outside. It's time for a test.
Azuku is kind of happy about this. I mean, he's been working hard all his life, and he's not against the idea of just skipping out on something like orientation and going and immediately taking some sort of physical exam that would basically show who's the best or who's the strongest in the class. He finds it quite funny because he never himself was praised like crazy until he showed great results. Azuku was quirkless basically his entire life. So all the way up until he was really good at martial arts, he wasn't getting any praise. And that would be just kind of how he is. He thinks praise is something unique. He doesn't take praise as one of those things that is a common courtesy, something that just always happens. Nonetheless, their little test would eventually begin when all of them are out there waiting. Aizawa would call out Azuku, saying that since he got first in the entrance exam, he will be throwing this ball first as far as possible. Bakugo gets really mad, thinking that Azuku lied to him, and Azuku just laughs, saying that and just shrugs his shoulders, saying that who else did you think would have gotten first? Immediately, Azuku grabs the ball and begins to focus. Using one for all at about 40 or to 45%, Azuku then wraps Black Whip around the ball as well, launching the ball as hard as possible with Black Whip attached, giving it that extra sling to it, like this giant slingshot you could call it. It just gets swung and thrown like crazy. Azuku launching it, and it goes about 1,500 meters. Azuku pretty happy with the score, and not a scratch on him, not hurt, no nothing. He's happy with the results. Azuku would then walk back, and basically everyone is in complete shock. He was able to use, well, whatever quirk or whatever power he used or showed in the entrance exam, combined with his physical strength, to actually sling the ball further than anybody possibly expected. Of course, Bakugo would go next, but he would be about 600 meters shy of Azuku, and this would just piss him off even more at the idea that he's still behind this quirkless loser. This loser that just got his quirk, supposedly? This is ridiculous. Of course, Azuku is just watching and doesn't really mind, and everybody around him begins to say how fun this is going to be, how cool it's going to be, and Azuku looks at them and then looks at Aizawa, and just by the vibe he gets from Aizawa, he knows what's coming next. Aizawa immediately cuts them off.
Fun, huh? Really? That's what you think? Fine. Let's raise the stakes. If, and when I mean, when this is all over, whoever is in last place is getting expelled. Good luck going to another school. It's not my problem. Aizawa basically turns back around and tells them to whoever's next to come up. Everybody is in complete shock except for really Azuku and a couple other people that don't really care. Obviously someone like Momo Yaoyorozu knows that this is quote-unquote a hoax, but in terms of, well, Azuku, Bakugo, Todoroki, they don't really care because they're not getting last place. It's not even going to be close. Of course, all of these would continue on. Every little event that they have would just continue on and would finish up with relative ease. After being completely done with the events, the last place is actually Invisible Girl, or Hagakure, and Aizawa does expel her and does basically get rid of her. But this wouldn't last very long. It's just a front that he wants to put on to show everybody else that he is dead serious. But after about a day, she would be back into the class. I mean, he's allowed to expel and reinstate whenever he wants. So he just wanted to make sure that his point would come across that he is dead serious and has the power to basically expel the entire class if he just wanted to. Of course, that next day and the days following, they would do minor stuff, normal school things, of course, math, science, whatever you can really think of, and eventually it would lead to them having their first real bit of hero training. And that first real bit of hero training would come from All Might himself. He'd come charging through the door, like basically someone on crack, and would say, "I am here." All Might would walk into the door like a normal person, he remarks, and says that they'll be actually starting their hero or their first hero training. He tells everybody to get on their hero costumes, in which when Azuku checks out his own, it's actually
a lot more high-techy than obviously the one he got from his mother. This time around, he would have the specs gone to the support course, and he would have something extremely similar, if not basically the same, as the one he would have later on in the seasons. Of course, he wouldn't want something very dingy and basically would break on impact for no apparent reason. Azuku would head over, get his hero suit, put it on, and it would emulate All Might a little bit, but of course would have his own little distinctions. Certain things that would allow him basically not to get grabbed, so it's more like skin tight in a way, but doesn't form fit too much where he can't move. He still wants to use his martial arts to an extent, but if he goes to the ground with somebody, he doesn't want baggy clothing that they can grab onto and hold him there. He wants to be able to slip and slide out of any scenario whenever he wants. That's kind of just that martial artist in his mind talking, right? Normally you would just have shorts, or like these like shorter shorts and no shirt in some events, and obviously that wouldn't be occur. Maybe in certain aspects you would have a big like kimono, but other than that, I mean, he's not gonna rock around with a huge kimono on. So he would arrive with the rest of his class with their hero suits on, and he'd wait for the advice of All Might. And All Might would begin to explain that this is what's going to happen. Heroes versus villains. It's something simple and something that's going on, well, forever. He begins to explain that there will be 2 heroes, 2 villains. The goal for the heroes is to go seize the bomb or capture both villains and then seize the bomb. For the villains, the goal is to either capture the heroes or basically draw out enough so that the timer runs out before they can actually touch the bomb. Obviously, the villains do have a good amount of advantage, but that's how real life is. Villains will have the advantage. You don't know what the villains will do, and that's the point of a hero. You have so much more to basically gather information and try to know compared to everybody else. And immediately after that, everybody would then be assigned their groups. Azuku would be told that he is with Ochako Uraraka and they are the heroes. And on the other side is Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida as the villains. The villains would head out to the building, and basically Ida would start playing his quote-unquote role. Of course, Ochako would ask Azuku what he thinks about basically what they should do. What's the plan, all that. Azuku says that knowing Bakugo, he'll probably come screaming down that staircase and try to attack them. He'll immediately capture Bakugo. That should be the first job, and then getting rid of Ida should be easy enough. It's close quarters, and he knows that Ida has a speed-like or engine-like quirk, and dashing around in the small quarters with quirks like theirs won't be very easy. And Ochako's pretty shocked. Not only in raw strength, Azuku is extremely powerful, but he has a mind for all of this. He thought out everything in a matter of seconds, and he knows how to analyze everybody's quirks. I mean, that isn't even just because he's a prodigy. Regular Azuku was very good at that. He was extremely good at figuring things out and knowing how to study and utilize other people's quirks against them, at least to a certain extent. Of course, we don't see that as much in canon anymore, but still, it was something that was part of Azuku's toolkit. About 5 minutes would pass, and that would be the planning phase of the heroes, and they'd be allowed to enter. Azuku would tell Ochako to go basically in the other direction, and he'll meet her upstairs, that he'll handle Bakugo. But, of course, Bakugo, just like he thought, would come screaming down the staircase, charging right at Azuku. That one blast forward would be his last blast he would take. Azuku slipping right under it, slamming him on the ground, and immediately pinning his arm underneath Bakugo. He punches Bakugo straight in the jaw, knocking him out almost instantaneously. He just charged straight at somebody that has flawless martial arts. That's idiotic. He knows how fast Azuku is and know how strong he is now, but of course Bakugo's rage and overestimation of himself would allow him to falter. Of course, in this version, Bakugo may have tried harder and trained a little bit more, but he still has not been taught the lesson that Azuku would teach him now. Immediately capturing Bakugo after being knocked out, it's over the intercom, and Tenya Ida hears it that Bakugo has already been captured by the heroes. which is insane how fast that just occurred. Azuku then dashes up the staircase, meeting with Ochako, and eventually approaching the room where the bomb it currently is. Tenya Ida may have cleared out everything in that said room, but let's be honest, it doesn't really matter. Azuku then grabs Ida with Black Whip and holds him there still. Ida tries to move with his engine quirk, but Azuku would basically wrap Black Whip around the engines on his legs, covering them up and not allowing him to move, allowing them to capture Ida with relative ease. Of course, they would all head back to basically All Might, and All Might would explain what they did good, what they did wrong, but to be honest with you, Momo would do most of that. Momo would just explain how it seemed like Izuku basically had everything figured out before it even started. The match was practically over before it started. Bakugo being kind of mad about this. I mean, he goes over to be checked out by Recovery Girl, but there's no crazy, basically, damage to him. He was just knocked out relatively quickly, and it was over before it started, like she said. And of course, all the other matches would go on as usual, and everything would go relatively similar. And then, obviously, you would lead to a couple more days, and finally, the future heroes would go into their first bit of rescue training. Aizawa would begin to explain to them.
Okay, there's buses outside. They're waiting for you. When we get on the bus, you can kind of do whatever you want. Just don't be too loud. I'm tired. But also, we're going to the USJ. The USJ is a rescue facility, and we'll have another pro hero there as well, and she'll be helping you. Okay, everyone leave.
They would all head out to the buses, and during this bus ride, everybody would be debating on who's the strongest. Most going back to either Todoroki or Azuku. Bakugo not even being in the conversation, he got destroyed. Some people would argue that Azuku's basically technique and mind for all of this and being able to approach every scenario relatively easily makes him stronger than Todoroki. Todoroki might have some crazy ice powers, but who says Azuku can't just blast through that easily or even have a plan to just defeat him? Of course, there would be some arguments back and forth, but Azuku would have no opinion on it. He doesn't really care. Frankly, he believes that everybody has their strengths, everybody has their weaknesses, even including himself. He has weaknesses. It's not like he'll bring them up and tell everybody, but of course, everyone does. That's just basically how all of this works. Eventually, it would lead to them finally arriving at the USJ, and the one and only Pro Hero 13 would be there to greet them. Pro Hero 13 would bring them all in, telling them that that this is the plan. The plan is basically there's going to be multiple training or rescue facilities. They have mountains, collapsed buildings, basically a broken down ship. Anything you can really think of, that's what's going to happen. Just as she's saying this, though, Azuku gets a massive headache. A headache that is splintering. He doesn't understand how, and he kind of slightly takes a knee and then shakes his head extremely hard. Azuku would struggle back to his feet, and Aizawa would ask what's going on, and Azuku says he doesn't know. As he says this, though, Kirishima would ask if there's fake villains as well, pointing toward the middle of the USJ, and, well, there they were. A ton of villains rising out of nowhere. Azuku realizes where this headache came from. It must be something to do with maybe One for All, maybe a different quirk, maybe just a reactive thing, an instinct thing. He doesn't know. Not 100%, but he can come to the conclusion later. That doesn't matter. Because just as all of these villains show up, his headache would go away. As if now that he sees the danger, there is no reason to sense it. Azuku stares over, and Aizawa tells the Pro Hero 13 to protect the kids. He jumps into action, and Azuku watches as Aizawa begins to handle villain after villain. Azuku questions if he can really handle all of that himself, but of course, Pro Hero 13 would say that he'd be just fine. He is a pro hero for a reason. Azuku would take her word for it, but would still be kind of uneasy about it. He's not sure, but out of nowhere, Danger Sense would go off once again, getting his headache, but nowhere near as bad this time. It seems like the warp portal, or Kurogiri, shows up right next to them. Azuku grabs a ton of them and is able to basically get them out of the way, but some of them are also basically in a position where right in front of Kurogiri. Immediately though, Pro Hero 13 tells them all to move out of the way as she's about to use her quirk, and Bakugo and also Kirishima instead don't listen and are about to jump and fight Kurogiri. Azuku, using Black Whip, pulls them both toward him as Pro Hero 13 smiles and begins to activate her quirk. Of course, this would almost defeat Kurogiri, but it would eventually backfire as she's extremely injured because of it. Azuku begins to look around and tries to get everybody out of there, but of course it's not that simple. Getting trapped within multiple portals, and he'd be sent off in the middle of this ocean, maybe a lake. Azuku looks up to see this ship, and he uses Black Whip to get up immediately. He stands above and sees that Asui and Mineta are already there. He asks if there's any plan to get out, and basically they were about to ask the same thing. Azuku begins to look at the ceiling. Maybe there's a way for him to swing across, but it's extremely high. He's not sure if Black Whip will even reach that far. There's some other things that he has an idea, but frankly, there's no 100% guarantee. Just as he's saying this, though, there are a ton of monsters beneath them. Azuku shakes his head and says that he could just go defeat them, that they could go defeat them themselves, or they could just basically blast over them. Azuku begins to ask how far Asui can actually jump, and she says pretty far. Frankly, she can leap off, at least if with Mineta in her arms, but it might need an extra boost once she begins to carry Azuku as well. Azuku says that's fine, that he can actually take the load off a little bit once they get closer to land, because he should be able to attach to something else and swing them over. Azuku says to basically follow his lead, and Mineta is basically crying. He's asking how he can be so cool under pressure. Azuku just shrugs, saying that this is the job of a hero, and if basically this is what you wanted, it's a pressure situation all the time. Azuku basically takes a swanton into the water, but doesn't. Right before he lands within it, he punches as hard as possible, creating a shockwave, making the air pressure go crazy, and he punches basically a hole in the water. He launches back up because of it, Asui grabbing him, and immediately he tells Mineta to start throwing his sticky balls. Him doing this allows them to basically just capture a bunch of the villains and just allow them to get away. That's about it. Azuku knows that they could have probably defeated them, but this was the best way to go about it. As they get to the land, he wants to check up on his Aizawa. As he does this, it seems like he's doing just fine. Luckily, Aizawa, he's pretty proficient in his fighting, and he's okay. As Azuku's basically is about to say that they should head out, he begins to sense something else. Something has just entered the battlefield. Something that Aizawa himself cannot handle. He tells Asui and Mineta to get out of there right now, that he can basically help out Aizawa the best he possibly can. Asui thinks this is a bad idea, but Azuku refuses to basically listen, telling them to go. He sees this creature, other known as a Nomu. This big hulking creature seems to be charging at Aizawa, but just as it's charging at Aizawa, Azuku dashes in and kicks it square in the face, sending it off to the side. Luckily, he was able to just imbalance the creature a little bit so he can push it over. But Azuku can tell quickly that his punches, kicks won't be doing damage. It seems like they have some sort of shock absorption. Maybe, he's not sure. Immediately, Shigaraki begins to mock this green-haired kid. You think you can keep up with my Nomu? This thing is built to kill All Might. He'll kill a kid like you in seconds. Aizawa tells Azuku to get out of here, but Azuku shakes his head and begins to ramp up One for All immediately, ramping it up to about 55%. Azuku being able to control it, but he does have a little bit of strain on his body. He basically charges back at the Nomu, kicking into it, and now he's doing some sort of basically impact. Yes, of course, Azuku is just using his agility to bob and weave, and he's not making any sustainable marks, but it is basically slowing down the Nomu. Azuku's goal is to just either get everybody out of there or wait for All Might himself to come. and that's basically the goal. He eventually will get the Nomu off balance, sweeping his leg with Black Whip and trying to keep the Nomu on the ground. That's his goal. If he can keep him there, not let himself get grabbed, he should be fine. Azuku continues to do this, but just as he thinks that he's doing this flawlessly, the villains never play fair and it's never a one-on-one. The hand of Shigaraki comes through a portal and is right next to Azuku's face, but as he grabs his face, nothing happens. Well, Aizawa is still on his feet and is the furthest thing from hurt. He never was basically injured massively by the Nomu, and he activated his quirk. Shigaraki begins to laugh, saying how cool Aizawa is, but just as he says this, Azuku grabs the arm of Shigaraki and pulls him in, forcing him through the portal, and of course, Kurogiri can't close the portal. He'll kill Shigaraki. He pulls him through the portal, and Azuku basically breaks one of his arms, throwing him to the side immediately as the Nomu punches Azuku square in the face as he gets sent backwards. Azuku wasn't even able to react quick enough using Danger Sense. I mean, he was basically going through the motions of something else before that. Azuku grabs part of the ceiling and swings above the Nomu, sending shockwaves back down toward the Nomu as Shigaraki's sitting there screaming in pain. Kurogiri takes it upon himself to immediately get Shigaraki out of there, transporting him away. But Shigaraki complains, saying that he can still kill All Might. If All Might arrives, he only needs one touch, and that it will be the end of the symbol of peace. But Kurogiri says that that's what basically the Nomu is there for. That as long as he's there, or if he's there commanding the Nomu, he'll be okay. So using Kurogiri's warp portals, that's kind of what they do. They begin to basically have Shigaraki's voice emulated through it. But that's about it. Shigaraki's been injured. But the Nomu seems to not be flinching at Azuku at this moment. Azuku's getting tired out, but just as he feels that he might not be able to stall long enough, the doors slam open, and guess who it is? It's All Might. The one that gave him One for All, the person, All Might himself, has finally arrived. Charging in at the Nomu, landing a clean blow, All Might tells Azuku that he'll take it from here. But Azuku disagrees, saying that he should be able to keep up. I mean, frankly, it seems like the old man is getting slower in his age. Azuku smiles toward him as he laughs a bit, and All Might says that, well, we'll see what he has. And of course, with a 55 or about 55% One for All Azuku and All Might himself being in this scenario, and obviously at the USJ, the Nomu would be defeated relatively quickly. All Might would do a ton of the heavy lifting, but the Nomu would be extinguished, and All Might wouldn't even be forced out of his giant form to be covered up. Luckily, he's still able to hang on to it and was able to leave before anybody could even see. But the other villains, unluckily enough, would escape. Of course, getting a couple bullet wounds, but other than that, they would head off, and now they just have some stasis Nomu that isn't moving at all. Azuku would want some answers. What the hell was that? Why would they want to go and kill All Might like that anyways? Who was that exactly? All Might not sure. They don't really know, but they can guess that this is who they know as the League of Villains. A villain group that will basically take on the mass majority of their time as heroes. The League of Villains is nothing to basically blink your eyes at. But as a student, Azuku shouldn't have to worry about this. All Might makes this clear and says that it's time for him to show everybody who he truly is. And this next upcoming thing is exactly how he'll do it. The UA Sports Festival. As long as he can win the UA Sports Festival, well, let's just say he should have every single person calling, every single agency not questioning one bit at him being quirkless at one point. Every agency will want him there as an internship, will want him there so that they can get even more notoriety from basically someone that went from quirkless, this Quirkless Prodigy that had his quirk be awakened, and now he's on the track to being the best hero alive. All Might makes this clear, and Azuku says he won't let him down and he won't let himself down. He promises that. All Might smiles and says that he had a good pick, and Aizawa definitely made a good choice too. But what will happen in the UA Sports Festival? What will happen in the future internship that Azuku takes place in? Well, you'll have to find out in part 3 of What If Deku was a Quirkless Prodigy. The UA Sports Festival. The next step in his hero journey, Azuku Midoriya would take front center stage in front of the entire crowd. He would begin his speech, and it was something simple, light, and he would tell everybody that this will be one entertaining sports festival, far more entertaining than anyone they've ever seen, and he promises that. Azuku makes this as a statement and a declaration and says that he's going to do his best, and he's sure everyone else is as well, to come out on top. Azuku would step off the podium and the crowd would go screaming. Girls would freaking obviously go crazy, and boys would be jealous as heck. But nonetheless, Azuku Midoriya would head back to his class and get ready for the sports festival to begin. Midnight comes out and begins to speak to everybody, explaining exactly what the first event would be. That first event, well, it's the obstacle course race. The obstacle course race is simple enough. It all starts with a corridor and then ends with basically a minefield. They don't know this for sure, but of course, the obstacle course race would be told and is about to begin. And of course, the obstacle course race would begin. All of the classes, everybody, class 1A, class 1B, and everybody else would go storming through the corridor. Azuku using this advantage to basically just swing across the corridor with relative ease, speeding past mostly everybody. As he looks behind him, he sees that Todoroki himself has frozen over the corridor, and he realizes that is one heck of an advantage. Nonetheless, he keeps sprinting forward as he sees the giant robots, the zero-pointers. In fact, Azuku just uses his black whip to swing across each one, and even using and utilizing danger sense every time he thinks he's about to get hit. He dodges out of the way with relative ease, and he gets past those big robots as if it were nothing. The next part is this large ravine, but I'll be honest, the large ravine is cleared in one foul swoop with Azuku. Azuku being able to use an extremely high amount of one for all already, being at 60%, he leaps it like it's nothing, and he's already onto the minefield. Looking at the minefield, he doesn't really think much of it, avoiding things as quick as possible, using danger sense to his advantage so he can maneuver around every single explosion or every single mine. This is extremely easy, and out of nowhere, Azuku is done. Azuku just broke so many records. Any records that basically were held on the obstacle race were shattered by Azuku. It wasn't even close. He destroyed them, and he stood in front of the entire crowd as they screamed his name. They're basically super impressed, and frankly, they all believe that Azuku is on the track to being the #1 hero. Of course, you have everybody else fall in line. You have Todoroki next, then Bakugo, and Bakugo is absolutely livid, pissed that Azuku was able to get the leg up on him again, and he made it look easy this time. Nonetheless, he swears that he's going to win this time around, and just as they begin to basically hear about this next event, they hear that it's actually called the Cavalry Battle. The Cavalry Battle deals with points that everybody has, and the first place winner is going to have 1 million points. Azuku is shocked to hear this, but kind of smiles. And frankly, everybody knows how good Azuku is, but are still kind of scared. It's a big target on your back, and do they really want to do that? Nonetheless, he would have his original team. He would eventually get Mei Hatsume, he would get Ochaku Uraka, Tokiyami, and that was about it. But at the same time, did he really need anybody else? Azuku is extremely strong himself, he's extremely tactical, and frankly, one plan, and that's all it would take. Using Azuku's danger sense, Azuku would be able to just bob and weave anybody that would try to grab his band. And frankly, everyone else's band, it didn't matter. As long as Azuku had his, it was over. Azuku would wait for people to try to capitalize, and of course, here and there people would. Even Todoroki's group would try, but one flick of his finger, they'd get sent off away. Of course, they continue to do this over and over again until his danger sense begins to ramp up like crazy. He looks around to see where Bakugo is. Maybe it's Bakugo himself about to blast him in his face. No, it's not. He looks around, Bakugo being over on the other side of the arena. he looks to his left and sees Tenya Ida charging up his boosters, about to use a reciprocal burst to grab his headband. Luckily, Azuku is able to catch this off immediately, telling Tokiyami to get Dark Shadow right in the place. Right as Dark Shadow swings through, Ida slams into Dark Shadow, and Dark Shadow is able to punch them all to the ground with relative ease, and Azuku is able to blast them the rest away by wrapping Black Whip around them and throwing them to the other side of the stage. The time is running out and extremely low. Everybody begins to converge on Azuku's group, but frankly, their defenses have been absolutely flawless, and they will continue to be flawless. Well, like I said, they might have been closing in, but so has time, and time just ran out. Luckily, everybody that would have made it normally in canon did make it, but Azuku would make it clean as heck. It wouldn't even be close. Azuku would keep the 1,000,000 points, and he would be on top, the first place winner on both events. All Might watching down currently from the teacher arena, where basically all the teachers are watching, and he's smiling, knowing that Azuku has the potential to take it all the way with relative ease. Just as he's beginning to think this, immediately the other matches are basically told. Luckily, they'll have a 10-minute rest. Azuku will be able to get his bearings, but his first match is against someone from the general studies, Shinso. Luckily, someone from his class, luckily enough, tells him exactly what Shinso is going to bring, telling him that Shinso is going to try to brainwash him by asking him questions. Once Azuku hears this, the fight is already over. But frankly, that quirk, it's extremely strong. He's surprised that he's in, the general studies. But he does realize that, when he was going to actually do the UA entrance exam, the robots would have been a problem without One For All. Yes, he was physically strong, to a certain extent, but who says he would have been able to sweep the leg of a robot and destroy it in time? Maybe the 1-pointers, but the 2 and 3-pointers, that would have been impossible. Same thing with the 0-pointer, that would have been extra impossible. But he begins to think, this guy Shinso, he must be extremely strong, but he's basically pulled back by, the society. Basically how they evaluate heroes. Nonetheless, Azuku smiles and begins to head off and gets his little bit of rest in until the next match against Shinso. The next match against Shinso is about to begin, and Azuku doesn't even activate his quirk. Shinso begins to bark orders at him, saying this, saying that, calling him a horrible person, calling him gifted, calling him basically this person of greatness. Oh, does he really feel like he's so much better than him? But without really saying much at all, literally, Azuku would approach Shinso and continue and begin to fight him, hand-to-hand combat. But this fighting was different. Azuku kept egging Shinso on just by his body movements, trying to get Shinso to do certain things. And immediately when Shinso would throw his right hand, Azuku would grab it and act like he's throwing Shinso's right hand toward Azuku, as if he's trying to emulate how to actually throw the right hand properly. Is he teaching Shinso how to fight in a battle? That's exactly what he's doing. Azuku is showing him multiple martial arts and how to properly using it without saying a word. Yes, of course, Shinso's not going to get it down perfectly. Nobody's that crazy. Even Azuku, being a prodigy himself, wasn't that insane. He wasn't instantly knowing all of these martial arts. He had to learn throughout the years. But he's teaching Shinso here and there. Shinso himself in the beginning thinking that it's some basically strategy to mess with his head, but he realizes that Azuku is straight up helping him, teaching him, helping him learn how to fight. Azuku continues doing this, and eventually Azuku realizes there's not much more he can even teach him on this battlefield. He taught him enough. Azuku basically grabs him and appears out of bounds and drops him out. And after dropping him out, he begins to tell Shinso that soon they'll definitely train together. He has some martial arts teachers himself that he can definitely send him to, but Azuku doesn't mind training him himself. Azuku smiles and says that soon he'll be in basically one of the classes with him, and he promises that. Azuku says that his quirk is so unique, and there's a reason why he wasn't able to make it into UA, at least the hero courses. Because, what was he supposed to do? How is he going to destroy robots? He understands that, but his quirk is powerful, and it can definitely be utilized properly. Azuku promises once again that he'll train him and get him stronger, get him basically up to par with martial arts, and he's sure that someone else would definitely be interested in doing so as well. He looks up toward the announcer group as Aizawa gives him a slight thumbs up, and Azuku heads off and gets prepared for his next match. And well, let's just say that next match is going to finally end the debate. Azuku versus Todoroki. Todoroki is a powerful person, and Azuku during this fight realizes though he's only using his ice. Like, why? Azuku begins to question him as he dodges with relative ease. It's pretty obvious that there's an agility disparity with Azuku compared to Todoroki. Even when Todoroki's not tired or anything, it seems like Azuku can basically just kite him and basically get away like it's nothing. Eventually Azuku would egg him on more and more. What are you doing? Use your full power. What are you gonna do? Use half your power? Half your strength? I might as well knock you out now. This is boring. It's useless to continue fighting like this. Azuku turns his back to Todoroki as danger sense flares off as ice gets sent to him, and he just backflips over it. Seriously. Fire. Use it. I know you can. Immediately Todoroki scoffs and says that he'll never use that old man's power, but Azuku would eventually crack into basically Todoroki's head, telling him that's not his old man's power, that's his power. Immediately Todoroki would erupt in flames, and Azuku would smile and begin to wave his hand toward Todoroki, telling him to bring it everything. The fire and the ice would boil over and get blasted toward Azuku, and Todoroki says that, well, it's not his fault if he gets hurt. Azuku shoots one Detroit smash through all of the ice and the fire, and just as that Detroit smash is going, he flips over it, flicking toward Todoroki as he gets smacked by this air pressure, and he immediately grabs him with Black Whip and throws him out. Todoroki is sitting there in complete shock. How did he do that so quickly? Azuku already had a plan to knock out Todoroki. Even if he used his fire, there was no chance in winning this fight. Azuku goes out and helps Todoroki up and says that there doesn't need to be some ill will rivalry between them. He didn't want him to use the firepower because, well, his father put him up to it or anything like that. He wanted him to use it because now he can truly be the hero he wants to be. Azuku makes this abundantly clear and says that forgiving his father for whatever he did is none of his business. It's none of Azuku's business at all. It's all up to Todoroki. Azuku then heads off and gets ready for his next fight, which will be against Tenya Ida. But frankly, let's be honest, that fight is going to be a complete wash. We've seen how Azuku just outmatches him, but I think the one we are all curious in is the one against Bakugo. In the finals, we finally got it. Azuku Midoriya versus Katsuki Bakugo. The fight that Bakugo wanted so bad. The rematch against, well, this quirkless loser that he had so much over, but now he just lost the grip. But what he didn't realize is that when he was brooding, when he was freaking out, Azuku was training. Azuku was working. And this is exactly what Azuku's been doing his entire life. Azuku's ready for this fight. And when it begins, well, Bakugo comes out with a pretty solid strategy. Hit and run. Azuku knows that once he gets his hands on Bakugo, the fight is over. Multiple explosion after explosion, trying to basically limit the footing of Azuku. But just as Bakugo's plan seems to be going well, Azuku grabs him by the arm and slams him on the ground. And Bakugo looks up at Azuku thinking that the fight's already over. But Azuku lets go and tosses him away and waves his hand toward him as if he's saying, let's go again. Azuku continues to do this, and it's as if he was humiliating Bakugo. It wasn't that he wanted to do so. It's not that he wanted to humiliate him. He was teaching him something. That there was more to all of this. That even when he was quirkless, there was more. He's relying way too heavily on his quirk, his raw power, thinking that's all that matters. Azuku proves that to be otherwise. Strategy, fighting styles, knowing how to adapt. That all matters. But at the end of the day, this would end with one victor and one victor only, and that's Azuku Midoriya, and he'll be standing at the top of the pedestal when Bakugo gets slammed to the ground, grabbed by Black Whip, and thrown out of bounds like nothing. Azuku makes it apparent that there are levels to this, and he's on a way higher level than everybody in the first year. Arguably on the level of third years, maybe even higher than that, but we don't really know because he's never fought them. Nonetheless, Azuku would eventually take the stand with everybody as well, with Todoroki, or with Bakugo, with him, and then also one other, which would be actually Tokiyami. No, yeah, Tokiyami, and they begin to get their medals. Bakugo kind of mad, but at the same time, he's realized it. He realizes that he's just outclassed at the moment, that he has to work harder. So he's not going to be all explosive like normal, but at the same time, whoever's watching knows the personality of Bakugo and knows what he wants. He knows, or they know that he wants to beat Azuku. So maybe that's something they'll use to their favor. But nonetheless, Azuku would still be given the #1 medal by All Might, the #1 hero, and All Might gives him a thumbs up, being proud of practically his son figure, and he's happy to see Azuku doing so well. But frankly, this should be expected. Handpicked by Aizawa, and a kid that worked so hard from the brink, from the very moment that he was told he didn't have a quirk and that he should figure out whatever else he wanted to do, Azuku found a way, and now he's here. Now he showed everybody else that he truly is that next step in hero society. Nonetheless, after that entire debacle, they would get to school the next day, and Aizawa would announce all of the internships that they gathered, Azuku and Todoroki being at the very, very top. Azuku because, well, he won and did crazy good. Todoroki because of his father. But nonetheless, everything seemed to be pretty well. Azuku would look through what he got, who he got, and where he could go, and he's not really decided. He's not so sure where he wants to go, or basically if he should go basically to Endeavors, maybe someone like Mirako. He's not sure, but he does realize something. Maybe, just maybe, the rabbit hero would be a good choice. I mean, his martial arts is heavy in arms and grappling, and yes, he has kicks, but he's not amazing with his kicks. He'd love to get better in terms of his kickboxing, so he feels that maybe that would be the way to go. He makes the checks, and he checks them twice, and he sends it in, and he makes an agreement saying that he'll go for his internship to the rabbit hero Mirako. Of course, that would go as well as you'd think. After some time, and eventually a car would pick him up, he would arrive, and Mirako would immediately want to fight. Azuku showed that his hand-to-hand combat skills is extremely good, and he asks Mirako if it's no holds bars. Can he do whatever? Mirako says yes, of course, he can use any technique he can possibly think of, and Azuku says that he's not going to use any technique. He just wanted to know if he can use all martial arts. Mirako is shocked to hear this, but smiles, saying that his little bits of martial arts won't help him. But Azuku would prove her wrong extremely fast. He tried to get his best, or try his best to get the fight on the ground. No, get your mind out the gutter, boys. All right, not like that. All right. He tried to get the fight on the ground, obviously limiting the fighting style of Mirako herself, but at the same time, it was extremely difficult. But once he got it on the ground, he was able to get her to tap out with relative ease. Mirako was extremely impressed, asking if maybe she should actually implement that in her fighting style. Azuku says that he's totally up for it as long as she can teach him how to properly use his legs in fighting, because that's what he wants, or at least expand on that. Mirako says that's definitely a deal, and that's what they end up doing over the course of this week of internships. But unfortunately, a dark cloud is coming over this entire hero society. It seems that Azuku, well, not being extremely friendly and attached to Tenya Ida, it seems something occurred. The phone would ring 4 days into internships, and that call, let's just say, was not the most nice call, was not the nicest and not the most warm call. That call was to inform Azuku that he needs to head back to UA and that the internships are getting cut short. He apologized to Mirko that he wasn't able to teach her more, and Mirko says the same, but he should have and will have extreme amounts of benefit with his legs now. Azuku smiles and thanks her as he leaves. When he arrives at UA, they're unfortunately told some horrible news. The hero killer Stain, well, he killed Tenya Ida. Luckily enough, Endeavor and many others that were there were able to capture him in this basically horrible act, and Endeavor was able to take him down, obviously with some scars and some badly injured wounds, but he was still able to take him down. But unfortunately enough, Tenya Ida was killed in battle. He put himself in a situation that he couldn't get himself out of, and Azuku wasn't there to bail him out. Unfortunately, this story will go on without Tenya, but the heroes will now have an even bigger boost in morale to make sure that they do their absolute best so none of this ever happens to anybody else ever again. Azuku, Bakugo, Todoroki, everybody would push themselves to the brinks and they'd be ready for the final exams that were to come. The written portion would approach, they'd finish it up with relative ease, and Azuku, being extremely smart, would have no trouble in that regard. But when we get to, well, the final exam, the practical, it's going to be a little bit different. It's Bakugo and Azuku, but it's not against robots, and it won't be. And after everybody figures out who they're going up against, being that the teachers, Azuku and Bakugo realize who they're going up against. All Might comes crashing down, and of course, it's the number one hero, All Might. All Might is going to be their opponent for the final practical exam. Of course, if they lose, they fail. And if they fail, they don't go to the forest training camp. At least that's what they've been told. So this battle means a lot. Azuku tells Bakugo they should plan, but Bakugo, of course, blows him off, saying that he doesn't want to plan. He'll beat All Might on his own. Azuku just knows that this wouldn't be the case. He knows that he might be able to go up against All Might 1 versus 1 now. He's not 100% sure in terms of raw strength how he fares up, but he's sure that he fares up pretty well. Nonetheless, after not planning at all, Bakugo and Azuku would go head to head at All Might in an abandoned city that was set up. They charge forward, and Bakugo wants to go in by himself. So what he decides to do is blast Azuku into the wall. He immediately leaves Azuku in the dust, Azuku basically shrugging this off, not knowing why Bakugo really wants to do this. Azuku eventually would head over there, and when he arrives, he sees him going head to head with All Might. But of course, All Might would get the better of him, but just as All Might is about to punch him in the back of the head to knock him out, Azuku comes barreling in with the same style of Mirko. One right leg first, straight to the jaw, at 65% of One For All, flatlines All Might, sending him flying toward the building. All Might even staggers to stand up. Azuku then kicks him once again in the ribs, and then the other ribs as well. Not even knowing where the injury was, Azuku just realizes that he lands perfectly on it, not really thinking too much about it. But he then sweeps All Might's legs as he basically is in a crazy amount of pain and grabs All Might with Black Whip, throwing him into the air and kicking him out of range. He goes over to grab Bakugo as he picks him up, Bakugo pushing Azuku out of the way and even punching him in the face. Azuku tells him to calm down, to stop doing this. Ever since they were kids, this is all he wanted. He wanted to be stronger, be better. And just when Azuku's quirk came about, well, Now Bakugo is pissed. Now Bakugo realizes that he lost his advantage. Azuku makes his appearance and decides something. He chops Bakugo in the back of the neck, knocking him out, grabbing him and jumping away, and they eventually will exit. And obviously they win. And Aizawa looks at this and sees the potential of Azuku, but questions Bakugo just a little bit. He needs to get Bakugo out of this psyche. And, well, since he lost, since Bakugo quote-unquote won, but frankly we all know that's still a loss, Bakugo will be, well, taking extra classes, but a little bit differently. Aizawa wants some one-on-one to make sure Bakugo gets out of this mindset. This is a horrible mindset to be in, and, well, they'll figure that out pretty soon. Azuku would go see how All Might's doing, and All Might is extremely impressed, seeing how much he's grown over this course of time. It's really hasn't been that long, not even a year yet, and Azuku has made leaps, absolute leaps. Azuku smiles and thanks him and believes that he can still use some more training. So luckily he passed, so he'll be going to the forest training camp. Aizawa makes it pretty clear that, well, everyone was going, but he wanted to put some extra pressure on them. Nonetheless, it is time for them to pack, get ready, and head off to the buses tomorrow. And that's exactly what they do. They head off on the buses and they get ready for hell so that they can start training like crazy and get ready for whatever's to come next. Azuku and everybody on the bus would eventually arrive at the training camp. At least that's what they think. Being on a cliff overlooking the training camp with the Wild Wild Pussycats. And, well, that's because they're about to get launched off a cliff. Immediately this earth begins to bend and the waves begin to be created in the ground and they get thrown off. But just as Aizawa was about to walk back in the bus, he looks up to see Azuku sitting on the bus. Yeah, that wasn't very nice, guys. Heads up's always good. What if some people can't fly? That's a long drop down there, guys. You realize that, right? Azuku starts kind of laughing and gets back up and begins to walk away. Aizawa telling the Wild Wild Pussycats that he told them so, that this kid is the real deal. Azuku follows, just does a front flip off the cliff and follows suit with the rest of his class, and their training in the forest training camp is about to begin. Azuku would begin traveling through the forest with his classmates. They're able to obliterate monster after monster, and Azuku especially doesn't have much trouble by any means. Well, being around 60 to 65% of One For All at this point, and having that extreme amount of strength and also technique, Azuku just buries and bullies his way through every single monster in that forest, and eventually their class would arrive, even on time this time. When they arrive, Aizawa is waiting and tells them that they did a pretty good job. Of course, saying that, well, they're going to have lunch, they're going to have this day kind of to rest and get settled in, and then they will finally begin their true training. During this time, Azuku would spot out a little boy or a little kid, and he'd walk over to introduce himself. The little boy by the name of Koda immediately goes to punch Azuku, well, in the family jewels, but Azuku is able to grab his hand before he's even able to do it because of danger sense. Azuku shakes his head and says that he really shouldn't try to low blow people he doesn't know. Of course, some of the Wild Wild Pussycats would try to basically apologize, people like Mandalay and everybody, but Azuku said it would be fine, and he doesn't really mind. It's just kind of what happens. A little kid that isn't, well, in the right frame of mind, or maybe doesn't enjoy the presence of the hero students. Azuku can already tell that the boy doesn't really like, well, hero students, doesn't like heroes. He's not sure why, but maybe he'll figure that out later. After the day was practically over, they have a nice dinner, go to take their little bath and all that stuff. They head to bed and then wake up the next morning. The next morning, Azuku and everybody else would be told exactly what their training would be. Each and every person has their own agenda, and Azuku would eventually get his. His is just to basically increase the output of not only One For All, but actually figure out any other powers that he can possibly take grip hold of. Of course, Aizawa does not say this around anybody else, but Azuku knows exactly what to do. He begins to actually spar with Tiger, but frankly the spars become very lopsided because Azuku is just outclassing him not only in martial arts, but frankly in just raw power. Azuku could just throw simple punches and probably would outpace him just by raw speed and power alone. Azuku being able to just flip Tiger on his head more or less as quick as possible proves that Azuku is leaps and bounds over the Wild Wild Pussycats, at least in terms of basically fighting ability. Azuku would continue training, sometimes with various people, being that of Todoroki, sometimes Bakugo, and some other people that are there, even some people of Class 1B. But of course, nobody can exactly keep up with Azuku, but being able to basically increase One For All to a higher state is definitely his goal. He does this the entire day, and he slowly but surely begins to build up. His goal is basically just to use a really high amount of One For All without hurting his body, because of course he could ramp it up to 90%, but if that would actually hurt his body quite a bit. It won't like break his bones by any means, but he'll have this like really sore feeling in his entirety of his body, like it's struggling to maintain. And of course Azuku doesn't want that. He wants to be relaxed in that form and be able to fight freely and openly. And during this time, Azuku would pick up on a good amount of basically techniques and different ways to control One For All to the best of his ability, trying to work with Black Whip, Danger Sense if he possibly could, and some other things that he begins to learn quickly. Actually, he does learn of something. He began to believe that he was just jumping really high and he was allowing himself to float up there, but he actually figures out that he has another quirk that practically allows him to fly, or at least sort of. It's called Float. Float being able to basically allow him to guide or glide through the air when he just jumps off a surface, basically gives him that imitation of flight. And as long as he's jumping from side to side or jumping over and over and even turning off Float and then turning it back on, he can kind of regulate his flight to a certain extent. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's definitely something he'll use for mobility purposes. After some more time and after about another day, Azuku would be just hanging out with everybody and having dinner. Of course, they decide that they're going to have a day off because, well, they've been training like all heck. Of course, they've been training just day in, day out as much as possible, so they're actually taking a bit of a break and they're going to be doing their little test of courage. During this time though, Azuku is basically eating food and decides that he's going to bring food to Koda, seeing that Koda actually went up to a nearby mountain. He heads over there and he brings Koda food, but Koda really does not want to talk to Azuku. Azuku was told at one point though that Koda doesn't really like heroes. Of course, he doesn't know why, but Mandalay would tell him that, well, his parents died because they were in the line of fire as heroes. Azuku would eventually comfort Koda, telling him that, for one, it's not his fault, and for two, he can't really do much about it. But Azuku begins to speak with him about everything, about heroes, about who he wants to be. Obviously, Azuku has gone through a lot, worked extremely hard, and for a while, he thought he was going to be quirkless, that he had to push through everything quirkless. But now he got blessed with a quirk, and he explains that it arrived out of nowhere. Of course, he can't tell Koda the exact truth, but this will definitely make Koda feel a lot better. But just as he's saying these things, a voice comes from the forest, a raspy one, and definitely a terrifying one. A man by the name of Muscular begins to walk up, saying that, well, they should run away as fast as possible or they'll die, because obviously he's looking for someone by the name of Katsuki Bakugo. Azuku looks at him and basically tilts his head a little bit. Why are you looking for Bakugo? Explain. Muscular says that they're not only looking for Bakugo, they're actually looking for this kid called Azuku Midoriya, and frankly he looks a lot like him. Oh, so you want both of us? Interesting. Well, I'm gonna have to tell you, you're not getting out of here. At least, not conscious. Azuku in an instant is in front of Muscular, not even giving him a second to even breathe. Azuku grabbing him by the arm, flicking him basically flipping him on his back. Azuku kicks him right in the face and then pins one of his arms beneath basically his other arm. Azuku then begins to yank, getting Muscular in a semi chokehold from the top, from basically behind Muscular because he flipped him on top. And Azuku begins to yank harder and harder. Muscular tries to get out, but can feel that Azuku is like a gorilla. He was not letting go. Azuku is just that powerful at this point. Azuku then punches him right in the face again and then kicks him in the face, eventually knocking out Muscular extremely fast. He has no time to waste. He assumes that if there's one villain here, that there are many more, and just as he thinks this, fire begins to erupt throughout the forest. Azuku begins dashing around, eventually dropping off Koda, but smashing into villain after villain he sees, basically saving the mass majority of his classmates from either Nomus or just villains in general, and Azuku would eventually be heading over toward Bakugo. But just as he's heading over, he jumps through this odd-looking portal. He doesn't mean to, but it appeared right in front of him, and when he basically appears on the other side, he's hit with some sort of marble. Azuku is beginning to panic and realizes that he's trapped. He realized that Danger Sense didn't react quick enough, and frankly, he didn't react quick enough, because even if Danger Sense did, there is no getting himself out of that situation, especially when he was flying or just traveling as fast as he was. Nonetheless, he would wake up chained down to an area, or at least basically handcuffed to an area, and he looks to his left to see Bakugo. Immediately, he begins to think that, well, the villains must have gotten both of them, but frankly, this isn't that bad of a situation. Theoretically, and hopefully, none of them probably will be able to keep up with Bakugo and Azuku at the same time, and their little handcuff strategy might basically screw them up. And that is exactly what it did. Azuku, Bakugo were sitting there waiting for them to enter, and when they do, they begin to think that maybe it's for the best to let go of Bakugo. Obviously, they have Azuku because they want to know more about his power. It's so interesting. So similar to, well, quirks All For One has seen in the past users of One For All. Bakugo begins to hear this, and he's shocked to hear it, but then realizes that it all makes sense. Azuku lied. Of course he did. I mean, but would he have told anybody the truth? Why would he? He begins to look at Azuku thinking that maybe he's betrayed. And that's what the villains try to basically portray, that Azuku lied, that Azuku was basically falsely giving all of these basically interactions that weren't true, and that he's actually the successor of All Might himself. But Bakugo, after hearing this, begins to smirk. You really think that I care at all? You all are really, really, really dumb. Bakugo blasts off his cuffs, and he tells Azuku if he's really the successor of All Might, then they should have no trouble getting out of this situation. Azuku smiles and cracks his knuckles and then cracks his neck, saying that he agrees. Wholeheartedly he agrees. They begin to just straight up piece every single villain in the room with them, basically knocking out the mass majority of them and capturing all of them in one area, tying them up, and eventually the wall next to them would be broken through by the heroes. Azuku and Bakugo would look at the heroes and say that they're a little late, throwing the villains to them, but just as they throw them in midair, a portal grabs those villains and sends them off. Azuku and Bakugo would be teleported away as well, getting covered by this red goo, or this black goo, but when Azuku appears, he appears in the hand of someone with this black face mask by the name of All For One. Azuku struggles to get out of the grip, but immediately he just slams his arm into basically All For One's elbow, getting free as he hurt his elbow pretty bad. He is able to back off slightly, and he activates One For All as high as he possibly can, being that of about 80% without being extremely hurting right now. Of course, he kind of exerted himself when he was in that small room when he was fighting with Bakugo, but 80 to 90% he should be able to crank it up if need be. He sits there at 80% of One For All and stares at All For One. All For One begins his fight with Azuku, but I'm gonna be honest, this fight is something that All For One was not prepared for. He wasn't prepared for the successor of One For All to have a grip on so many quirks, and on top of that, be able to use One For All, the real power version of One For All, to the limit that he currently is. All For One gets hit in the mask, the stomach, and every vital point Azuku can even think of, he's pulling out all the stops. Technique-wise, Azuku is flawless. He is not pure power. Azuku begins to use his legs, his arms, anything you could think, his elbows, any martial arts he's ever learned, he begins to exploit every weakness and every ability All For One is showing. All For One tries to find an opening, and just as he thinks he does, Azuku dodges the tendrils that get sent at him without even looking. Azuku obviously has danger sense. He has a connection with the other basic successors before they even know, or the people in the past, and All For One feels that he's losing extremely quick. He wants to pull out his last stop, pulling out every quirk he possibly can. All For One loads it up into one arm. Just as he does this though, he immediately gets smashed in the back of the head by All Might himself. All Might lands a critical blow as Azuku does the same to All For One's face, and it's as if All For One himself was not a match for this duo. All For One out cold, and the other villains, the League of Villains, weren't even able to escape. Azuku wraps them up in Black Whip, and they all are captured. Of course, this is being televised, and Azuku would get in some minor trouble for fighting. But in a way, he was fighting out of self-defense. He couldn't just, leave. That wasn't a thing, or at least that's what the people and the police force begin to say. And they begin to say that the only punishment he'll be getting is to basically take a couple classes to learn that he shouldn't have done something like that. But on top of that, everybody in the outroar of the entirety of Japan believes that this young man should have a hero license. So they come to some agreement. As long as he goes through a couple classes of basically trying to stay out of trouble, quote unquote, which he basically won't even be doing those classes, he'll be gifted the provisional hero license, or a provisional hero license. Azuku, hearing this, is excited, and everybody in Japan is happy to hear this, but everybody now knows that Azuku is the successor to All Might. Pressure is one thing, but this is beyond just pressure. But Azuku has thrived off of this. He's always known that he was talented in terms of just working and work ethic. He's shown that throughout this time. And Aizawa himself put a bunch of pressure on Azuku, telling him that he has a chance at UA. And then pressure and more pressure he's been putting on himself. He's been doing it all his life. So this won't be any more pressure. So while the rest of his class is working on getting their provisional hero licensing exam after moving into dorms and all of that, Azuku would be actually training, working, and actually taking those classes, of course. But he would mostly be training with the big three. Aizawa began to believe that Azuku's strength actually probably rivaled them, maybe even stronger. He began sparring with people like Mirio, Nejire, and actually becoming a lot closer to the big three than most of his other classmates. After a couple days, eventually his classmates would arrive back, and Azuku would be told that they'll be starting up basically hero work studies. Of course, Azuku would wonder where he should go, but Mirio says that Sir Night-Eye has a place for him if he wants to basically come out. And of course, Azuku is completely fine with that. Sir Night-Eye is one of the best heroes he's ever seen, and he would love to do that. And the connection he has with the big three, the relationship, and basically how well they work together with Mirio, with Nejire, and of course Nejire is not in Night-Eye's group, but at the same time they still have a good connection in terms of fighting and also just working together now after basically knowing each other for a lot longer than obviously in canon, but also working together over the next or that week or so when they were out getting their provisional hero licensing or licenses. Nonetheless, this would lead Azuku to going to Sir Night-Eyes. Of course, he's already done the whole sparring with Mirio and stuff. I mean, frankly, he wouldn't do that again with his class. It wouldn't be fair. Azuku was going head-to-head with Mirio, arguably actually outclassing Mirio to a certain extent. And frankly, just pure martial arts, he would do that. Eventually, Azuku would head over to Sir Night-Eye, and Sir Night-Eye would decide to give him a bit of a test. That test would be to basically take this little stamp away from him. But Azuku would be able to do it with relative ease. Sir Night-Eye begins to be extremely shocked. He knew he was strong, but this strong is something different. He realizes that every future he was seeing, everything that he was seeing in front of Azuku, basically Azuku, what he was going to do, it all ended with Azuku grabbing the stamp, but how fast he was able to do it was insane. It was as if the speed itself was transcending time, as if his power is developing at such a rapid rate that nobody's even going to be able to keep up eventually. Azuku stamps his own paper and smiles and thanks Sir Night-Eye for the opportunity. Night-Eye nods and says that, well, they should just get right to work, immediately assigning Mirio and Azuku to their first patrol. During this first patrol, well, it seemed pretty simple. Everything seemed to be going relatively well, and Azuku just was taking it kind of easy. It didn't seem too crazy. He was just making sure that he kept an eye out for anything and anyone. But out of nowhere, out of a small alleyway, a little girl came running out and even crashed into Azuku. Luckily, Azuku was able to grab her and not let her hit the ground, and he asks if the little girl is okay. The girl is shaking with bandages all over him, and he wonders what's going on. But just as he begins to think this, danger sense begins to flare off like crazy as a masked figure begins to walk out of the alleyway as well, saying that he apologizes for his daughter's inconvenience and that she really shouldn't be, messing with the heroes. Azuku's danger sense begins to pierce through his head as if it's screaming at him to get the little girl out of there. Azuku looks up at Mirio, and Mirio begins to try and de-escalate the situation, knowing who this person is, but Azuku has none of it. Immediately, Azuku grabs the little girl, giving her to Mirio, and sends Black Whip right at Overhaul, grabbing him and tightly gripping him so that he cannot move any part of his body. Azuku basically begins to cocoon Overhaul with Black Whip, holding him there as long as possible, and he tells Mirio to get her to safety right now. Mirio is shocked, but obviously just follows the order that Azuku just gave, dashing away and getting out of there. Azuku begins to scream to everybody around, saying to go the opposite direction and to leave at this moment. Everybody tries to stay calm, but they all begin to run the opposite direction to clear out the area for basically who they know as the successor of All Might. Immediately, Overhaul struggles and tries to get out and even tries to touch Black Whip, but for some reason, nothing occurs. It's as if he can't even basically use his quirk on it. But at the same time, Azuku refuses to let his hands or anything touch any ground or anything at all, forcing him into the air and holding him there. Yes, this is extremely difficult for Azuku to maintain, and frankly, he might have a good grasp on Black Whip, but holding someone as strong as Overhaul exactly where he is, not the easiest thing to do. Just as he's holding him midair though, he begins to sense something. Well, of course, danger sense immediately triggers onto multiple people storming in. But just as these multiple people are storming in to basically help Overhaul, immediately Mirio is back and slams them to the ground as if they begin to pick off each one by one. Mirio says that there's more reinforcements coming and that they need to handle what's in front of them. Azuku asks if there's basically core canceling cuffs, they need them right now, or he'll have to knock out Overhaul and then use the cuffs, but he wants to make sure that they're there. Of course, they're fending off multiple people at once, and Mirio is basically taking that forefront, making sure to give Azuku just the time to hold Overhaul still. If he's as dangerous as they say, they don't want to let go of him. Holding him still is difficult, but Azuku is able to do so until those cuffs come. Of course, the other villains begin to try and swarm, trying to help Overhaul one after another. But of course, the heroes begin to storm in as well. Multiple reinforcements. We're talking from UA, but also from the agency of Night Eye. Of course, everybody is now arrived, and luckily Overhaul would be stopped right here and right now. Overhaul knew exactly who Azuku was, but maybe knew a little too late. He realized that Azuku was the same person he saw in the news fighting All for One, and of course he tries to escape. He's trying to escape this Black Whip, but he can't. Azuku's power is too great for this villain, and frankly, he's basically knew exactly what to do immediately. This Azuku has been working way too hard and has seen way too many things to allow this little girl to just leave, especially when and how much she's been hurt. Azuku knows his capabilities, and he knows All Might's philosophy. Especially when you're able to help somebody, you never turn your back on them. Azuku is able to subdue Overhaul by knocking him out and then cuffing him, and luckily they're able to get Overhaul and the Shihazaikai over the next couple of days off the street. Everybody commends Azuku, but Azuku says he didn't do much. Frankly, he most likely took the worst course of action. Frankly, if he didn't hold Overhaul still, and let's say he didn't have the power to do so, well, they could have put everybody else in danger far quicker than actually helping anybody. But of course, Mirio says to cut him some slack. Of course, Azuku did the right thing. They saved the little girl, and that is all that matters, and everybody is safe and sound. Azuku nods and smiles as Night Eye commends him as well. And eventually this whole case with the Shihazaikai is wrapped up in a matter of days. Azuku would continue with his work study. Obviously, everybody else would as well, and it wouldn't be cut any short. But eventually, he would head back to class, and they would announce that something is going to happen, something is going on, and that is the Class 1A versus Class 1B. Of course, Azuku is kind of psyched to hear this. It's going to be really interesting. Class 1A versus Class 1B. But just as he heads over, Azuku's not going to be participating. Aizawa stops him and says that there's something else for him to do. Azuku has gone beyond what most pro heroes are even at this moment, but there is somebody that Aizawa wants him to test, somebody that he wants on board. And once they're on board, and once Azuku is able to evaluate him, he might be able to join Class 1A, or maybe Class 1B. They're not so sure yet, but that's what Azuku's job is, to evaluate this new potential student. Okay. Who do you want me to evaluate? And isn't that a teacher's job? Don't play with me, kid. Just do what I ask, okay? Go to the gym over there. It'll be alright. There's another teacher waiting for you. Azuku heads over, and when he arrives, he's greeted by President Mike, and President Mike tells him that the other student is waiting in there. Azuku walks in, and the big three is there as well, watching what's going on, and Azuku looks toward the student they're talking about, Hitoshi Shinso, the one that's, Azuku promised to train and get stronger. Azuku smiles and slams his fist into his hand and says that if he's ready to join the hero course, he'll definitely get him right. He'll definitely get him in shape and get him ready. Shinso smiles and says that their little fight won't be as easy as it was back then. Azuku shrugs and says that he disagrees, that Shinso may have gotten stronger, but there are levels to this. But he'll make sure that Shinso is far, far stronger than any of these other students that he's currently, intertwined with. Azuku smiles and gets ready for combat, and their training will finally begin. Azuku's road to being the #1 hero is clear, but how will he affect everybody else around him? And how has he affected everyone else around him? His job now is to get Shinso in the right, basically, stratosphere and being strong enough to join Class 1A or Class 1B. And that's exactly what he's going to do. Teach him flawless technique, teach him martial arts, and various things to come. But that is a story for another day. And this is the end of the story of What If Deku Was a Quirkless Prodigy.
Always what's left.